Welcome to Farm to Stable, a science-based equine nutrition podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nettie Liebert. I'm a lifelong horse person and professional equine nutritionist with the goal of helping horses and their humans create balanced diets to set them up for success, no matter what age, discipline, or circumstance. Disclaimer, the information discussed here is based on current scientific research and is for educational purposes only. Every horse's individual needs vary. This is not a substitute for veterinary medicine or nutrition consultation. Hello and welcome to Farm to Stable, an equine nutrition podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nettie Liebert, and today it's going to be all about the equine skin. And I've got to thinking about this, and I thought it would be a good time of year to share. Here in North America, many of us are in shedding season. Yes, so coming home from the barn with all kinds of horse hair all over clothes and in your hair and your mouth and all of these things. And I thought it would be good to really talk about the coat and the skin and the health and how nutrition relates to it. Sort of. So remember that the skin is one of the largest organs a horse has. Right? It has the essential function, just like you and me, of protecting the body from infection and from any kind of foreign material getting inside the body. It also is going to help prevent excessive water loss. Remember, we need water for our hydration. Kind of everybody knows that. So it stands to reason that in a generally healthy, well-nourished animal, that's critical for supporting healthy skin and maintaining those skin barriers. Now, here's the catch and why I said sort of earlier. Now, data specific to horses is pretty limited on how nutritional factors really specifically affect skin health of the horse, but there is some well-established information in human nutrition and a couple of things in horses that can be used to extrapolate and to support horses. So we're going to get right into it. We're going to start with the structure of the skin. So very generally, and this is really well described in the Merck Veterinary Manual, if you want to look that up, the skin has three basic layers. The epidermis, which is on top, which you see, the outermost layer, the middle layer, which is the dermis, and the subcutaneous layer or the innermost layer. Now, there is a basement layer of cells that is right between the middle section, the dermis, and the epidermis, the outer section, which serves as another protective barrier between those two. And any of the hair and the hoof tissue and their skin appendages, if you want to get technical, they grow out of that dermis and the epidermis. So I am not an equine dermatologist, but that is just some general anatomy of the skin. So growth of the hair and the hooves can be affected by nutrition, hormones, season, environment, drugs, disease state. Any of you who are managing horses with pituitary pars intermedia dysfunction, PPID, or also known as equine Cushing's disease, know that this time of year your horse may have an excessively long hair coat, which may not be limited to the winter time. But again, so that's an example of a disease state and a hormonal imbalance that affect coat health. Now, how are we going to nourish this skin? Well, you probably won't be surprised to hear that omega fatty acids, which we've talked about a bit on this podcast, are an essential piece of this puzzle. And I'm talking about essential omega fatty acids, omega-3 and omega-6 particularly. And by essential meaning, of course, they must be consumed in the diet. So omega fatty acids have this vital function for maintaining the structure of your cells. So, for example, without omega-6 fatty acids, your cells essentially would fall apart. That's a little extreme, but you get the idea. The omega fatty acids kind of insert themselves into the membranes of the cell to help give it strength and integrity to keep all the components of the cell that need to be there inside. So when you consume omega fatty acids in the diet, or when your horse does, they get incorporated into those cell membranes of pretty much every tissue in your body to help maintain that barrier of the cell. Now, both omega-3s and 6s are important for that cellular structure. I'm not going to get too far into the ways and means of 3s and 6s in this podcast, but we know that a deficiency of those essential omega fatty acids could result in itchy skin or dermatitis, increased water loss through the skin, that flaky skin, and just a generally compromised barrier function. So if a horse is getting a lot of skin infections or abrasions or having trouble with things like rain rot, it is possible that a supplement may be able to help. Again, for the cure part, you're going to have to talk to your veterinarian. But from a nutritional point of view, some supportive nutrition could potentially include the addition of some of these omega fatty acids. So what about vitamins and minerals? Of course we had to go there. Now, the first one that you're probably thinking of is biotin. And that's right. That's a good instinct. Biotin is a water-soluble B vitamin. And what biotin does, it does a lot of things, actually. It's important for helping the body to synthesize fatty acids. Remember, the body does make some of its own fatty acids. Some it can make, some it has to consume in the diet. Energy production, metabolism of amino acids, and cholesterol. So cholesterol is also fat, and it is important for the skin. So a deficiency of biotin commonly shows up as really severe, again, dermatitis, dry, itchy skin. But there hasn't been any documentation of toxicity. And part of the reason is that because biotin is water soluble, whatever the body doesn't need will just be excreted in the urine. Water-soluble vitamins, if they're not used, the body gets rid of them. If they're fat-soluble, the body can store them, which is why there's potential for toxicity there, which we'll talk about in a minute. So if you feel like you need to supplement biotin, how do you do it? Well, there's no definitive defined requirement for biotin per the National Research Council, and it's thought that perhaps some of the bugs in the microbiome make enough and the horse consumes enough in the diet that it's okay. We have a lot of work to do to verify that. But there is some evidence that a study that fed 15 milligrams of biotin per day to thoroughbred horses helped hoof hardness. Now, if you go to the internet and you start searching how much biotin do I feed my horse, you're going to get wildly different answers. So enlist an equine nutritionist if you want to do this and talk about what might be right for your horse based on their condition, their overall diet, and you can see what may be missing here and there and determine the right amount of biotin to supplement. So that is just one study that I mentioned. There are a lot out there, and I'm not going to get into all of them, but it is something that typically, if you have a horse, say, with what we call, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes here, bad feet or that scaly skin, a lot of times that biotin supplement needs to be continual. But again, it's going to depend on the individual horse. So let's get into some fat-soluble vitamins. And remember, you probably figured this out, but fat-soluble vitamins need to be consumed with dietary fat in order to be absorbed. One example is vitamin D. You might say, wait a minute, isn't vitamin D made in the skin? Yes, it is, but it can be consumed in the diet as well. So a deficiency of vitamin D is known to cause bone deformities, particularly in growing horses. Vitamin D, fun fact, is necessary for the absorption of calcium. So if you have no fat, but you're consuming vitamin D, you're not going to absorb either vitamin D or calcium. So you need fat for vitamin D and calcium absorption. Fun fact. Horses with no exposure to sunlight, which they have done experimentally, and insufficient dietary vitamin D could be at risk for this. Now, excess vitamin D, remember, it's fat soluble, so it can be stored in the body, leading to a potential of toxicity, could cause calcification of soft tissues and could potentially be fatal. So where's the balance? Now, your horse is not going to develop vitamin D toxicity if he's turned out in the sunshine all day. Okay, that's not how it works. But the average horse who weighs 1,100 pounds or 500 kilograms that's in light work requires a minimum of 3,300 IUs of vitamin D per day. And that's often satisfied simply by exposure to sunlight. Most horses who are well kept and who are in humane conditions are not deprived of sunlight. So typically, we're not too worried about deficiency. There is a form of vitamin D called vitamin D2 in sun-cured hay, and the body can convert that into the active form, which is vitamin D3. So you may or may not be able to rely on that. Hey, it depends again on the type, the variety, the growing conditions, how long it's been stored, etc. But in general, healthy skin is definitely important to support that vitamin D production in the body. Still with me? All right, we got one more vitamin to go. We're going to move on to vitamin C. Now, one of the cool things about horses is they can produce their own vitamin C in the liver. Now, that's something that humans cannot do. So humans, you and I, we need to consume vitamin C in our diet. Horses don't have to. So there are no classic cases of deficiency reported in horses. Now, however, in humans, a vitamin C deficiency can result in, you guessed it, scurvy, which is the condition where collagen synthesis is impaired. Now, collagen is a really crucial protein that's needed for skin's integrity, hence the reason I want to talk about it in today's episode and how it might relate to skin health. So if your horse has compromised liver function or liver disease, a vitamin C supplement may be necessary. But in general, if they're overall healthy, they probably don't need a vitamin C supplement. And again, I am speaking in generalities here. All right, so we've covered some of the major vitamins that we think about when it comes to skin and coat health, really. But let's talk about a couple of minerals, and specifically zinc and copper. Now, zinc and copper also get a lot of attention when it comes to bone development, especially in young growing horses. They're also important for skin health too. So the horse's skin contains a fairly moderate amount of zinc, and deficiency could lead to something called parakeratosis. So if a horse has scaly or crusty skin, it could potentially be linked to a deficiency of zinc. Now, if you have too much zinc in the diet, it could potentially prevent the proper absorption of another mineral, copper, which we'll talk about in a minute, which in turn could then cause those problems with bone metabolism, especially, as I mentioned, in those young growing animals. So let's go back to our average 1,100 pound or 500 kilogram horse, maybe in light work. That horse requires a minimum of about 400 milligrams of zinc per day. Now, sources of zinc, they're pretty common in most horse feeds, particularly wheat middlings, also bran, and commercial ration balancers, of course. So depending on your horse's diet, chances are, if it's well balanced, you're meeting zinc needs without a problem. Now, what's in the hay depends. And I can't tell you because there's no hard and fast rule about what the mineral concentration of a given type of hay is. You've got to have it analyzed. And often the analysis of zinc and copper might cost you a little bit extra, but sometimes it could be worth it. Copper is the other mineral I want to talk about, and it is necessary for the production of a number of enzymes that help synthesize and maintain melanin, the pigment in the skin, as well as connective tissue, among other things. There's a lot of other things copper does, but we're going to stick to those for our purposes today. Now, there is not a lot of data out there, but there is some that says a copper deficiency mostly affects bone metabolism, like I talked about earlier, but horses seem to be pretty tolerant of high doses. Now, that said, it is not recommended that you just go out and feed a whole bunch of copper to your horse because minerals need to be fed in balance. And if you feed too much of one mineral, you could potentially throw off the absorption of another and have sort of a cascading effect on a number of different things, from enzymes to bone metabolism to cellular health, etc. So for that average 1,100 pound or 500 kilogram horse in light work, the minimum requirement is about 112 milligrams of copper per day. Now, why am I throwing out these numbers to you? Just to give you an idea. So remember, zinc was 400 milligrams, copper was about 112. Very often, zinc and copper are fed in a ratio of about 4-to-1 or 3-to-1. So 4 parts or 3 parts zinc to 1 part copper in the overall diet to ensure that both minerals are absorbed properly. Now, if you read up on equine nutrition a lot, you may have heard about the calcium to phosphorus ratio. Same idea. I'm not going to get into that today. But again, minerals often compete for the same transporter in the small intestine. And by that I mean they need the same vehicle to get across the intestinal barrier to be absorbed into the bloodstream. And if you have too much of one, it might prevent another from being able to take that ride and get absorbed. So that's why some of these ratios are very important. So overall, that balanced diet is going to be key for supporting skin health. We do need more research in horses. Again, there is some discussion about going back to the omega-3s. It may be supportive of horses with skin allergies, especially as here in North America, spring is coming, even though we're not feeling it as I record this. It's extremely cold in much of the United States and Canada. That omega-3 fatty acid supplement may help with horses who are sensitive to those cholicoides, the biting midges, and have some other skin sensitivities. So more research is needed, but that's an example of something that can be nutritionally supportive of skin health in horses. Again, more research needed. But overall, balanced diet, supplemental fat, and essential fatty acids are helpful for supporting that skin's barrier function and that shiny hair coat and ensuring that diet is tailored to the horse's individual needs. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's true. Will help to support that healthy skin and coat overall. Now, I didn't talk too much about how nutrition affects shedding, but in general, shedding is usually dictated by daylight. Again, it can be affected by other things, as we talked about Cushing's disease, other environmental factors, other disease states, and things like that. So healthy, balanced nutrition will just help support that normal cycle of hair growth and shedding, which is usually triggered by the amount of daylight and season. So I'm going to leave it there. If you have more questions about nutrition for the skin, overall topic suggestions, or you'd just like to reach out and say hello, feel free to drop an email to equinenutritionphd@yahoo.com. Thank you so much for listening. Please share and like and subscribe to the podcast if you found it interesting. I'd love to hear your topic suggestions, as this podcast is for you and is designed to be educational. And I just want to reiterate that the numbers and the things that I've discussed here are in general and not necessarily specific to your horse. Work with a qualified equine nutritionist to help determine that. I know, I have to say it. So in the meantime, if you are in the throes of winter, stay warm out there. If you're in the southern hemisphere, we're jealous. We hope you're nice and warm. And thank you again for listening. Happy riding. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Farm to Stable, a science-based equine nutrition podcast. Please share and subscribe if you found the content interesting. And if you have a topic you'd like to hear about, send it to equinenutritionphd@yahoo.com.